The morning sun cast long shadows across New Terra Colony as 8-year-old Emma Chin skipped along the gravel path toward the research station where her mother worked. Her backpack bounced against her small shoulders, filled with drawings she had made for Dr. Martinez and the other scientists. The colony had been her home for 3 years now, ever since her parents joined the terraforming project on this distant world. Emma loved living on New Terra. The sky was a soft purple color, and the grass grew in spirals instead of straight up. Strange butterflies with wings like glass floated through the air, making tiny musical sounds when they flew. Her favorite part was the forest that surrounded the colony. The trees were tall and silver, with leaves that changed color based on the weather. Walking beside her was Whiskers, her orange tabby cat. The cat had traveled with the family from Earth, one of the few pets allowed on the colony ship. Whiskers was getting old now, his once bright orange fur now streaked with white, but he still followed Emma everywhere. The other colonists often joked that Whiskers was more like a dog than a cat because he was so loyal and protective. The research station sat at the edge of the colony, where the scientists studied the local wildlife and plant life. Emma's mother, Dr. Sarah Chun, was a xenobiologist who spent her days cataloging the amazing creatures that lived on New Terra. Emma had been to the station many times before, but today felt special because she had drawn pictures of all the animals her mother had shown her. As they walked, Whiskers suddenly stopped. His ears perked up, and his tail began to twitch. The cat looked toward the forest with an intensity that made Emma pause. She had learned to trust Whiskers' instincts. On Earth, he had always known when storms were coming or when strangers were approaching their house. "What is it, Whiskers?" Emma asked, crouching down to pet the cat. His fur was standing up along his spine, and she could feel him trembling slightly under her hand. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Emma realized she couldn't hear any of the usual sounds. No musical butterflies, no chirping from the bird-like creatures that lived in the silver trees, no rustling of the spiral grass in the wind. Even the air seemed still. Whiskers made a low growling sound deep in his throat. Emma had never heard him make that noise before. It was different from his usual purr or meow. This sound was primal, warning, dangerous. From the shadows between the silver trees, something moved. At first, Emma thought it might be one of the colony survey teams returning early from their expedition. But as the shape emerged from the forest, she realized it was nothing human. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall on 4 powerful legs. Its body was covered in dark, mottled scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The head was elongated like a wolf's, but much larger, with rows of sharp teeth visible even when its mouth was closed. Most terrifying were its eyes, 6 of them arranged in 2 rows, each one glowing with a sickly yellow light. Emma had seen pictures of this creature before in her mother's research files. It was called a shadow hunter, and according to the scientists, they were supposed to be extinct. The last confirmed sighting had been over 50 years ago, during the early days of colonization, when several outposts had been attacked and destroyed. The creature's 6 eyes locked onto Emma. Its massive head tilted slightly, studying her with an intelligence that was both alien and predatory. When it moved, it made no sound despite its size. Each step was calculated and precise, bringing it closer to where Emma stood frozen on the path. Whiskers positioned himself between Emma and the approaching predator. The small orange cat looked impossibly tiny compared to the massive alien beast, but he held his ground. His back was arched, his fur standing straight up, and that strange growling sound continued to rumble from his throat. The shadow hunter paused when it noticed the cat. Its 6 eyes shifted to focus on Whiskers, and Emma could have sworn she saw confusion in that alien gaze. The creature had probably never encountered anything like a cat before. Earth animals were rare on New Terra, and most of the colonists kept their pets close to the settlement. For a moment, predator and cat stared at each other. Emma found herself holding her breath, afraid that even the smallest sound might trigger an attack. The shadow hunter's muscles tensed under its dark scales, and she could see its claws extending from its feet, each one as long as her fingers and sharp enough to cut through metal. Then Whiskers did something extraordinary. The old cat stepped forward directly toward the massive alien predator. His growling grew louder, more intense, and he began to make a sound Emma had never heard before. It wasn't quite a hiss, and it wasn't quite a yowl, but something in between that seemed to carry across the open space with unnatural power. The Shadow Hunter actually took a step backward. Its glowing eyes widened, and for the first time since emerging from the forest, it seemed uncertain. The creature's head tilted again, but this time the movement suggested confusion rather than predatory focus. Emma realized she needed to run. Whatever was happening between Whiskers and the alien creature, it wouldn't last forever. The research station was still half a mile away, but there were emergency shelters scattered along the path. If she could reach one of them, she could trigger the alarm and bring help. But she couldn't leave Whiskers. The cat was still standing between her and the predator, his small body radiating defiance and protection. Emma had read enough of her mother's research to know that shadow hunters were incredibly fast. If she ran, it would chase her. If Whiskers tried to follow, the creature would catch them both easily. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The shadow hunter seemed to be trying to understand what it was facing. In its experience, prey either ran or cowered. It had never encountered something so small that stood its ground and challenged it directly. Whiskers began to move in a slow circle around Emma, never taking his eyes off the alien predator. The cat's movements were deliberate and careful, almost ritualistic. Emma noticed that with each step, Whiskers seemed to grow more confident while the shadow hunter became more agitated. The creature's scales began to shift color, darkening from mottled gray to deep black. According to her mother's research notes, this was a sign of extreme aggression in shadow hunters. They changed color before attacking, using the darker scales to absorb more heat and increase their muscle efficiency. But something strange was happening. Instead of preparing to attack, the shadow hunter's color changes seemed erratic and uncontrolled. The creature's 6 eyes began to dart between Whiskers and Emma, and its breathing became rapid and shallow. Emma recognized these signs from when she had watched nature documentaries about Earth predators. The alien creature was experiencing something it had never felt before: uncertainty and possibly even fear. Whiskers completed his circle and sat down directly in front of Emma. His tail was still twitching, but his posture had changed from aggressive to protective. The cat was no longer growling, but Emma could feel a strange vibration in the air, almost like a very low-frequency humming that she felt more than heard. The shadow hunter's scales flickered between black and gray, its confusion evident. The creature took another step backward, then another. For the first time since the encounter began, Emma felt a spark of hope. Whatever Whiskers was doing, it was working. Then, everything changed in an instant. The shadow hunter's eyes suddenly blazed brighter, and its scales locked into deep black. The creature had made a decision. It lowered its massive head and tensed its powerful legs, preparing to leap over the small cat and reach its intended prey. Whiskers exploded into motion. The old cat launched himself directly at the alien predator's face, his claws extended and his voice raised in a battle cry that seemed to come from somewhere deep in Earth's evolutionary memory. The sound was primal and fierce, carrying the fury of every wild cat that had ever defended its territory or its young. The shadow hunter reared back in surprise as the small orange projectile struck its elongated snout. Whiskers' claws found purchase in the creature's dark scales, and he held on with the determination of his ancestors who had once faced down much larger predators on Earth. The alien creature shook its massive head, trying to dislodge the cat, but Whiskers held firm. His claws were designed by millions of years of evolution to grip and hold, and even the shadow hunter's armored scales couldn't protect it from the precisely placed strikes. Emma watched in amazement and terror as her elderly pet battled a creature 20 times his size. Whiskers moved with an agility she hadn't seen from him in years, dodging the shadow hunter's attempts to grab him while continuing his relentless attack on its face and eyes. The shadow hunter let out a roar of pain and frustration that echoed across the colony. The sound was unlike anything Emma had ever heard, part shriek, part growl, and completely alien. But underneath that terrifying noise, she could hear something else, genuine surprise and what might have been respect. For the first time in its long life, the apex predator of New Terra had encountered something that refused to be prey. Something small and seemingly helpless that fought back with a ferocity that defied logic. The Shadowhunter had never faced an Earthcat before, and it had no context for understanding the evolutionary advantage that came from thousands of years of hunting and territorial defense. Whiskers managed to rake his claws across one of the creature's 6 eyes, causing it to recoil with a sharp cry. Yellowish fluid leaked from the wound, and Emma could see that the injured eye was now dim and unfocused. The cat had actually managed to hurt the massive predator. But Emma could see that Whiskers was tiring. His movements were becoming slower, and his breathing was labored. The old cat was giving everything he had, but he couldn't keep up this level of intensity much longer. She needed to do something to help, but what could an 8-year-old girl do against a creature that could tear apart metal? The answer came to her as she remembered something her mother had told her about Shadowhunters. They hunted by sound and movement, but they also relied heavily on their ability to intimidate prey in a freezing with fear. The creatures had evolved to hunt animals that were either completely passive or predictably aggressive. They weren't adapted to deal with something that was both protective and tactically intelligent. Emma began to yell, not a scream of fear, but a loud, sustained shout that she directed right at the shadow hunter. She clapped her hands together as hard as she could, creating sharp cracking sounds that echoed off the surrounding trees. She stamped her feet and made herself as big and loud as possible. The effect was immediate. The shadow hunter's attention shifted between the cat on its face and the suddenly noisy human behind it. Its 6 eyes, including the injured one, tried to track both threats simultaneously. The creature's advanced hunting instincts, honed over millions of years, were telling it contradictory things. Whiskers took advantage of the distraction to land another solid strike, this time across the shadow hunter's sensitive nose. The creature's head snapped back, and for a moment, the cat lost his grip. Emma's heart stopped as she watched Whiskers fall toward the ground and the massive alien predator's open jaws. But the old cat twisted in midair with the grace of his species and landed on his feet several yards away. He immediately spun around to face the shadow hunter again, his orange fur now streaked with the creature's yellowish blood, his green eyes blazing with determination. The shadow hunter paused, blood dripping from its wounded face. Its remaining 5 good eyes stared at the small cat with what Emma could only describe as bewilderment. In its world, prey that fought back this effectively simply didn't exist. The creature's entire evolutionary framework was being challenged by something that shouldn't have been possible. Emma continued her noise-making campaign, adding more sounds and movements to confuse the predator. She threw her backpack at the creature's feet, causing it to jump sideways. She picked up handfuls of the spiral grass and threw them in the air, creating unexpected movement that caught the shadow hunter's attention. Between the cat's physical assault and Emma's psychological warfare, the alien predator was experiencing something completely outside its understanding. For millions of years, its species have been the undisputed masters of New Terra. Nothing had ever challenged them successfully. Nothing had ever fought back with such coordination and determination. The shadow hunter began to back away more deliberately now. Its scales shifted from black to gray, and its breathing slowed from the rapid pace of hunting to something more measured and cautious. The creature's body language was changing from predatory aggression to something Emma recognized from watching documentaries about Earth animals: strategic withdrawal. Whiskers didn't pursue the retreating predator, but he didn't relax either. The cat maintained his defensive position between Emma and the shadow hunter, his tail still twitching with readiness. Emma could see that her pet was exhausted, but he was prepared to continue the fight if necessary. The alien creature took another step backward, then another. Its massive head swiveled between cat and girl, as if trying to memorize them for future reference. Emma had the strange feeling that the shadow hunter was learning from this encounter, adding new information to its understanding of what was possible in its world. With a final look at Whiskers, the creature turned and melted back into the forest shadows. It moved with the same silent grace it had shown when emerging, but now there was something different in its posture. The absolute confidence of an apex predator had been replaced by the wariness of something that had encountered the unexpected and lived to be surprised by it. Emma waited until she could no longer see any sign of the shadow hunter before she moved. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand, but she managed to walk over to where Whiskers sat panting heavily. She scooped the old cat up in her arms, feeling his heart beating rapidly against her chest. "You did it," she whispered into his orange fur. "You actually scared it away." Whiskers purred weakly and rubbed his head against her chin. Emma could see several small cuts on his face where the shadow hunter's scales had scratched him, but he seemed otherwise unhurt. The cat looked up at her with eyes that seemed older and wiser than before, as if the encounter had awakened something ancient and primal within him. As they continued toward the research station, Emma couldn't stop thinking about what she had witnessed. Her ordinary house cat had faced down one of the most dangerous predators in known space and won, not through size or strength, but through courage, intelligence, and the kind of protective instinct that had made cats beloved companions to humans for thousands of years. She thought about all the stories her mother had told her about the early days of space exploration, when humans had been considered weak and vulnerable compared to the other species they encountered among the stars. Those early human explorers had survived, and thrived not because they were the biggest or strongest, but because they refused to give up and they protected what mattered to them. Looking down at Whiskers, Emma realized that her cat had just demonstrated something profound about Earth creatures in general. They might not be the largest or most physically intimidating beings in the galaxy, but they possess something that might be even more valuable: the willingness to stand up to impossible odds when something important was at stake. As the research station came into view, Emma began to run. She needed to tell her mother what had happened, needed to make sure the other colonists knew that shadow hunters were no longer extinct. But more than that, she needed to tell everyone about Whiskers, about what a small orange cat from Earth had accomplished when faced with the impossible. The morning sun was climbing higher in the purple sky, and the normal sounds of New Terra were slowly returning to the forest. But Emma knew that something fundamental had changed in their small part of the galaxy. A shadow hunter had learned that Earth creatures were more than they appear to be, and a little girl had learned that heroes came in all sizes. Dr. Sarah Chun dropped her coffee cup when Emma burst through the research station doors. The ceramic mug shattered on the metal floor, sending hot liquid splashing across her boots, but she barely noticed. Her 8-year-old daughter was clutching Whiskers against her chest, both of them covered in dirt and what looked like blood. "Emma, what happened?" Sarah rushed to her daughter, her hands automatically checking for injuries while her scientist's mind cataloged the details. The blood wasn't red like human blood, but yellowish and thick. Whiskers had several small scratches on his face, and his orange fur was matted in places. "Mom, there was a shadow hunter." Emma's words came out in a rush. It came out of the forest, and it was huge and scary, but Whiskers fought it off. "He saved me." Sarah's blood turned cold. She knelt down to Emma's level, her hands gently but firmly gripping her daughter's shoulders. "Emma, listen to me very carefully. Shadowhunters have been extinct for over 50 years. Are you sure it wasn't one of the local predators? Maybe a thornback or a spike wolf?" "No." Emma shook her head vigorously. "I've seen all your pictures, remember? It had 6 eyes and dark scales, and it was bigger than anything else on New Terra. It was definitely a shadow hunter." Dr. Martinez looked up from his workstation where he had been analyzing plant samples. The elderly xenobiologist had been studying New Terra's ecosystem longer than anyone else in the colony. His weathered face was pale as he processed Emma's words. "Sarah," he said quietly, "if the child is correct, we need to evacuate the outer research stations immediately. A living shadow hunter changes everything." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. The colony's defenses had been designed to handle the known predators of New Terra, dangerous creatures, but nothing approaching the legendary ferocity and intelligence of the shadow hunters. If even one of them had survived in the deep forest, the entire colony was at risk. "Emma, I need you to tell me exactly what happened," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her internal panic. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." As Emma recounted the encounter, Sarah found herself struggling to believe what she was hearing. Her elderly house cat had faced down a creature that had once destroyed entire military outposts. The idea seemed impossible, but the evidence was right in front of her. Whisker's injuries were consistent with close combat against something with very sharp natural weapons, and the yellowish substance on his fur matched descriptions of Shadowhunter blood from the old colonial records. Dr. Martinez had moved to the communications console and was already sending priority alerts to the colony's defense coordinator and the other research stations. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he transmitted emergency protocols that hadn't been used in decades. "The nearest military support is 6 months away," he said without looking up from his screen. "If there's a surviving population of Shadowhunters, we're on our own until the next supply ship arrives." Sarah carefully examined Whiskers while Emma continued her story. The cat was exhausted but alert, his green eyes tracking every movement in the room. When she gently touched one of his scratches, he didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, he seemed almost proud of his wounds, like a veteran soldier displaying his battle scars. "The blood sample will tell us for certain," Sarah murmured, carefully collecting some of the yellowish fluid from Whisker's fur with a sterile swab. "But if Emma's description is accurate..." She trailed off as she placed the sample under the microscope. The cellular structure that appeared in the viewfinder was unmistakable. She had studied preserved Shadowhunter tissue during her xenobiology training, and this was a perfect match. The hexagonal cell walls, the dense protein chains, the distinctive enzyme markers, all of it confirmed what Emma had been telling them. "It's confirmed," Sarah announced, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is genuine Shadowhunter blood. They're not extinct." The research station's alarm system suddenly activated, filling the air with a piercing wail. Red emergency lights began flashing, and the automated security doors sealed themselves with heavy metallic thuds. Dr. Martinez had triggered the station's lockdown protocols. "Colony defense reports unusual movement in the outer sectors," Martinez called out over the alarm. "3 more research teams are requesting immediate extraction." Whatever happened with Emma and her cat, it wasn't an isolated incident. Emma pressed closer to her mother, still holding Whiskers protectively. The cat's ears were flattened against the alarm noise, but he remained calm in her arms. Sarah noticed that despite everything that had happened, Whiskers seemed remarkably composed for an animal that had just survived a predator attack. "Dr. Chun," came a voice from the communication system. It was Commander Torres, the colony's military liaison. "We need you and your team to prepare a full threat assessment immediately. If Shadowhunters are active again, we need to understand their behavior patterns and capabilities." Sarah activated the reply function. "Commander, we'll compile everything we have, but our data is 50 years old. These creatures may have evolved since the last confirmed sightings." "Then, we need new data," Torres replied grimly. "How long before you can have a preliminary report ready?" "Give us 2 hours," Sarah said, looking at Dr. Martinez for confirmation. He nodded, already pulling files from the research station's archives. As the immediate crisis protocols engaged around them, Sarah found herself studying Whiskers with new eyes. The cat had somehow managed to drive off a predator that military forces had struggled to contain during the early colonization period. How was that possible? Emma seemed to read her mother's thoughts. Whiskers was amazing, Mom. He wasn't scared at all. He just stood right in front of me and made this sound I've never heard before. The shadow hunter actually backed away from him. Tell me about this sound, Sarah said, activating her recording device. Every detail might be important for understanding what had happened. It wasn't like his normal meow or purr, Emma explained, unconsciously mimicking her mother's scientific approach. It was deeper, and it seemed to go on forever, like it was coming from somewhere inside him that was much bigger than he is. Dr. Martinez paused in his file searching. Vocalization as a defense mechanism? That's interesting. Earth cats do have a wide range of sounds they use for communication and territorial disputes. But this was different, Emma insisted. It made the shadow hunter confused, like it had never heard anything like that before. Sarah was beginning to form a hypothesis, but it seemed almost too extraordinary to believe. Earth's evolutionary history was completely different from that of New Terra. Cats had evolved alongside other predators, developing strategies for dealing with creatures much larger than themselves. They had learned to use psychology as well as physical ability in their survival tactics. Emma, you said the shadow hunter seemed confused. Can you describe exactly how it behaved? It kept tilting its head and looking back and forth between me and Whiskers. Its scales kept changing color, like it couldn't decide what to do. And when Whiskers moved in that circle around me, the creature actually stepped backward. Sarah exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Martinez. They were both thinking the same thing. Shadow hunters were apex predators that had never encountered serious resistance from their prey. They had evolved in an environment where they were completely dominant, never needing to adapt to creatures that fought back effectively. It's possible, Martinez said slowly, that the shadow hunter had no behavioral framework for dealing with Whisker's response. A small creature that displays aggression instead of fear might be completely outside its experience. The communication system crackled to life again. All stations, this is Colony Central. We have confirmed shadow hunter activity in sectors 7, 12, and 15. All personnel in outer areas are to shelter in place until further notice. Sarah felt her heart skip. Sectors 7 and 15 contained families with children. If the shadow hunters were actively hunting, Commander Torres, she said into the communication device, this is Dr. Chun. I have a preliminary recommendation for civilian safety protocols. Go ahead, Doctor. Any families with Earth origin pets should keep those animals close. We have reason to believe that Earth creatures may have natural defensive capabilities against shadow hunters. There was a pause before Torres responded. Can you explain that recommendation, Doctor? Sarah looked down at Whiskers, who was now purring softly in Emma's arms despite the chaos around them. The old cat's green eyes seemed to hold secrets that went far beyond his domestic appearance. Our initial analysis suggests that Earth animals may possess behavioral traits that can confuse or deter shadow hunter attacks. We're still gathering data, but the evidence is compelling. Understood. Colony Central will include that information in the next safety bulletin. As Sarah and Dr. Martinez began compiling their research on shadow hunters, Emma sat quietly with Whiskers, thinking about what she had witnessed. The cat had saved her life, but somehow she felt like she had learned something much bigger than that. Something about courage and standing up to things that seemed impossible to face. Mom, she said suddenly, do you think other Earth animals could do what Whiskers did? Sarah paused in her research. It was a fascinating question and one with potentially enormous implications for colonial defense. Earth had produced thousands of species over millions of years, each with their own survival strategies and adaptive behaviors. I don't know, sweetheart, but it's definitely something we need to investigate. Dr. Martinez had located the old colonial records and was reading through accounts of previous shadow hunter encounters. His expression grew more troubled with each report he reviewed. Sarah, look at this, he said, pointing to his screen. Every single recorded attack followed the same pattern. The shadow hunters would isolate individual humans, use intimidation to paralyze them with fear, then attack when their prey was completely helpless. And today, They encountered something that refused to be intimidated. Something that not only fought back, but actually took the offensive. Emma listened to the adults discussing the technical aspects of what had happened, but her attention kept returning to Whiskers. The cat had closed his eyes and was resting peacefully in her arms, but she could still feel the strength in his small body. He looked like an ordinary pet, but she now knew there was something extraordinary hidden beneath his domestic appearance. The research station's main screen lit up with an incoming transmission from Colony Central. Commander Torres appeared, his military bearing evident even through the digital connection. Dr. Chun, we've just received reports from the outer settlements. 3 separate families have reported that their Earth pets successfully deterred Shadowhunter approaches. 2 dogs and 1 cat, all displaying similar protective behaviors to what your daughter described. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and amazement. Commander, it appears we may have inadvertently brought our own defense system with us from Earth. How quickly can you develop a comprehensive analysis of Earth animal defensive capabilities? We'll need time to interview the other families and study the behavioral patterns, but I can have preliminary guidelines within 12 hours. Make it 6, Torres replied. We have 17 families with Earth pets currently in the threatened areas. If these animals can provide protection, we need to understand how to maximize their effectiveness. After the transmission ended, Sarah sat down next to Emma and Whiskers. The weight of responsibility was settling on her shoulders. Suddenly, the survival of the colony might depend on understanding something that no xenobiologist had ever studied: the interaction between Earth animals and alien predators. Emma, I need you to think very carefully about everything that happened with Whiskers. Every detail might be important for protecting other people. Emma nodded seriously. I'll remember everything, Mom. But can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you think Whiskers was so brave? He's just a regular cat, but he stood up to something 100 times bigger than him. Sarah looked at the elderly orange cat, who was now watching them with those knowing green eyes. How could she explain millions of years of evolutionary development to an 8-year-old? How could she describe the countless generations of cats who had survived by being clever, fierce, and utterly uncompromising when protecting their territory or their humans? I think, Sarah said carefully, that Whiskers was showing us something we had forgotten about Earth creatures. They may seem small and ordinary, but they carry the wisdom of survival in their genes. They know how to face things that are bigger and scarier than they are. Like humans do. Sarah smiled, understanding what her daughter was really asking. Yes, Emma, like humans do. That's probably why we've always been such good friends with cats and dogs and other Earth animals. We all learned how to be brave when we had to be. Dr. Martinez looked up from his research with an expression of wonder and concern. Sarah, I've been analyzing the behavioral patterns in these reports. The Earth animals aren't just randomly fighting back. They're using coordinated tactics, distraction, intimidation, strategic positioning. It's like they're drawing on instinctive knowledge about how to handle predator encounters. Which makes sense, Sarah replied. Earth's evolutionary environment produced both predators and prey species with highly sophisticated survival strategies. Our domestic animals are descendants of creatures that had to be clever to survive. The communication system activated again, this time with a colony-wide announcement. Attention all residents. Colony Defense has implemented new safety protocols based on recent xenobiological discoveries. Families with Earth origin pets are advised to keep these animals with them during the current emergency. Initial reports suggest that Earth animals may provide natural protection against local predator threats. Emma looked up at her mother with pride. They're telling everyone about Whiskers? They're telling everyone about all the Earth animals who are helping protect people, Sarah clarified. Whiskers was the first, but he's not the only one. As the afternoon progressed, more reports came in from around the colony. A German shepherd had chased off a Shadowhunter that was stalking a family's home. A small terrier had somehow convinced 2 of the creatures to retreat from a playground where children were hiding. Even a pet rabbit had managed to create enough confusion to allow a family to reach safety. Sarah was building a picture of something remarkable. Earth animals, despite being completely alien to New Terra's ecosystem, possessed defensive capabilities that were perfectly suited to countering the Shadowhunters' hunting strategies. It was as if millions of years of evolution on Earth had prepared them for this exact encounter. Dr. Chun, came Torres' voice through the communication system. We need to discuss expanding this strategy colony-wide. How many Earth animals do we have in the settlement? Sarah checked the colonial records. 47 families have Earth pets, Commander. 38 cats, 22 dogs, and various smaller animals including rabbits, birds, and 1 ferret. And you believe all of these animals could potentially provide protection? We're still gathering data, but the preliminary evidence suggests that Earth creatures have innate defensive behaviors that are highly effective against Shadowhunter psychology. Emma listened to the conversation with growing amazement. Her ordinary day had started with a walk to the research station, but now her cat was helping save the entire colony. She looked down at Whiskers, who was still purring contentedly in her arms. "You're a hero," she whispered to the cat. "The whole colony is going to be safer because of what you did." Whiskers opened one green eye and looked at her with what she could have sworn was satisfaction. Then he closed his eye again and continued purring, as if facing down alien predators was just another normal part of being a cat. As the emergency protocols continued around them, Sarah realized they were witnessing something historically significant. For the first time since humans had begun exploring the galaxy, Earth animals were proving themselves to be not just companions, but active partners in survival. The bond between humans and their pets, forged over thousands of years on Earth, was now extending into the stars. The day was far from over, and they still had much to learn about the Shadowhunters and how to coexist with them. But thanks to one brave orange cat and a little girl who trusted him, the colony now had hope for a solution that no military strategist had ever considered. Outside the research station, the purple sky of New Terra was beginning to darken toward evening. In the forest, ancient predators were learning that the galaxy was bigger and more surprising than they had ever imagined. And in the safety of the research station, a small cat purred peacefully while scientists worked to understand the miracle he had made possible. 3 days after the first Shadowhunter encounter, the New Terra colony had transformed into something resembling a military research facility. Every Earth animal in the settlement had been carefully documented, their behavior studied, and their protective capabilities tested under control conditions. What the scientists discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about evolution, survival, and the nature of courage itself. Dr. Sarah Chan stood in the colony's main laboratory, watching a video replay of the morning's experiments. On the screen, a small beagle named Max was calmly facing down a captured Shadowhunter juvenile through reinforced transparent barriers. The alien predator, which should have been the dominant presence in any encounter, was pressed against the far wall of its containment unit, its 6 eyes focused entirely on the small Earth dog. "The pattern is consistent across all species," reported Dr. Williams, the colony's animal behaviorist who had arrived on the last supply ship. "Cats, dogs, rabbits, even a pet bird belonging to the Morrison family. They all display the same fundamental response to Shadowhunter presence." Emma sat nearby with Whiskers on her lap, both of them watching the scientific proceedings with interest. Over the past 3 days, Whiskers had become something of a celebrity in the colony. Children pointed at him in the corridors, and adults spoke his name with the kind of respect usually reserved for war heroes. "What exactly are they doing?" asked Commander Torres, who had been observing the tests all morning. "I mean, I can see that the Shadowhunter is afraid of a dog that weighs less than its head, but why?" Dr. Chin pulled up a complex chart on the main display. "We've identified several factors working in combination. First, Earth animals evolved in an environment with multiple apex predators. They learned survival strategies that don't exist in New Terra's ecosystem." She clicked to the next slide, showing brain scans of Earth animals during exposure to Shadowhunter presence. Second, their neurological responses show patterns we've never seen before. When confronted with a shadow hunter, Earth animals don't experience traditional fear responses. Instead, they enter a state that Dr. Williams has termed protective alertness. It's remarkable, Williams added, pointing to specific areas highlighted on the brain scans. Their stress hormones actually decrease when protecting humans, while their cognitive function increases dramatically. They become calmer and more intelligent in the presence of extreme danger. Commander Torres studied the data with the intensity of someone whose job depended on understanding every advantage available to his people. And the shadow hunters? That's where it gets really interesting, Sarah continued. Shadow hunters evolved as the only apex predator on New Terra. For millions of years, they've never encountered anything that fought back effectively. Their hunting behavior is based entirely on intimidation and overwhelming physical superiority. Emma raised her hand like she was in school. But Earth animals don't get intimidated the same way. Exactly right, Emma, Dr. Williams smiled. Earth animals understand that size doesn't always determine the outcome of conflict. They've learned to use intelligence, coordination, and psychological warfare to defeat larger opponents. Whiskers purred and rubbed against Emma's hand as if agreeing with the assessment. The old cat had been surprisingly patient with all the scientific attention, submitting to brain scans and behavioral tests with the dignity of someone who knew his contributions were important. So, when Whiskers faced that first shadow hunter, Sarah said, he wasn't just defending Emma. He was demonstrating millions of years of Earth's evolutionary wisdom about how small, intelligent creatures can defeat large, aggressive ones. The laboratory's communication system activated with an incoming transmission from the outer research stations. Dr. Martinez's voice came through clearly, filled with excitement. Sarah, you need to see this. We've made contact with a wild Shadowhunter pack, and their behavior has completely changed since the first encounters with our Earth animals. The main screen switched to a live feed from the forest monitoring station. Through high-powered cameras, they could see a group of 6 adult Shadowhunters moving through the silver trees. But instead of the confident, predatory stalking they had shown in historical recordings, these creatures moved with obvious caution. Watch their positioning, Martinez continued. They're maintaining much larger distances from each other, and their sensory focus has shifted from hunting mode to threat assessment. They're acting like prey animals instead of predators. Commander Torres leaned forward, studying the alien creatures with professional interest. They've learned to be afraid. More than that, Sarah realized, watching the way the shadow hunters kept glancing toward the colony. They've learned to respect something they don't understand. That's a form of intelligence we hadn't given them credit for. Emma watched the screen with fascination. The massive alien predators that had seemed so terrifying 3 days ago now looked almost nervous as they moved through their own forest. They look like they're being careful not to bother anyone. Which brings us to the next phase of our research, Dr. Williams announced. We want to test whether Earth animals can establish ongoing peaceful coexistence with Shadowhunter populations. Torres raised an eyebrow. You want to what now? Think about it, Commander, Sarah explained. If Earth animals can not only defend against Shadowhunter attacks, but actually modify Shadowhunter behavior, we might be able to establish territorial agreements that benefit both species. You're talking about using house pets as diplomats with alien predators. We're talking about recognizing that Earth animals possess capabilities we never suspected, Williams corrected. They're not just randomly successful against Shadowhunters. They're demonstrating sophisticated understanding of interspecies psychology. To demonstrate their point, Dr. Williams activated a specialized communication array that had been set up in the laboratory. The device could project sounds across a wide frequency range, including the subsonic and ultrasonic registers that many Earth animals use for communication. Whiskers, Williams said gently, would you mind showing us that sound you made when you faced the Shadowhunter? Emma looked down at her cat. Can you do it again, Whiskers? The special sound? For a moment, Whiskers just looked at them with his bright green eyes. Then, as if he understood exactly what was being asked of him, he opened his mouth and produced the same extraordinary sound Emma had heard 3 days ago. It wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a yowl, but something deeper and more complex that seemed to carry layers of meaning. The communication array picked up the sound and analyzed it in real time. The results appeared on the laboratory's displays as a complex waveform that extended far beyond the range of human hearing. Incredible, Williams breathed, studying the data. This vocalization contains harmonic frequencies that match the Shadowhunter's own communication patterns, but arranged in a completely novel way. Whiskers is essentially speaking their language, but saying something they've never heard before. What is he saying? Emma asked, impressed that her cat was apparently multilingual. Based on our analysis of Shadowhunter vocalizations, Sarah said, consulting her research files, he's communicating something like protected territory combined with established dominance and willingness to fight. But the way he's combining these concepts is completely unique. Commander Torres was beginning to look like a man whose understanding of the universe had been fundamentally altered. So this cat is essentially telling the Shadowhunters that humans are under his protection and that he's prepared to defend his claim? That appears to be correct, Williams confirmed. And because the message is delivered using their own communication protocols, the Shadowhunters understand and respect it, even though they've never encountered anything like it before. The implications were staggering. Earth animals weren't just randomly effective against Shadowhunters. They were actively communicating with them using sophisticated interspecies diplomatic protocols that had emerged from millions of years of evolutionary development on Earth. Emma scratched whiskers behind the ears, marveling at the idea that her ordinary house cat was apparently a skilled alien diplomat. Are all Earth animals this smart? We're discovering that intelligence takes many different forms, Sarah replied. Earth animals have evolved types of problem-solving abilities that don't exist on other worlds. They understand concepts like negotiation, territorial agreements, and protective alliances in ways that purely predatory species never developed. Dr. Martinez's voice came through the communication system again. Sarah, the Shadowhunter pack has stopped at the forest edge. They appear to be waiting for something. The live feed showed the 6 massive creatures arranged in a loose semicircle just inside the tree line. Their body language was entirely different from the aggressive hunting posture they had shown in historical records. They looked almost respectful, like they were requesting permission to approach. This is unprecedented, Torres muttered. Apex predators don't ask permission for anything. They do when they encounter something that changes their understanding of how the world works, Williams observed. Earth animals have introduced concepts into their environment that they're still trying to process. Emma had an idea. Could we send Whiskers out to talk to them? Maybe he could explain that we don't want to fight if they don't want to fight. The adults exchanged glances. The idea was both fascinating and terrifying. Sending a house cat to negotiate with alien predators seemed like either brilliant interspecies diplomacy or an elaborate form of cat sacrifice. The safety protocols would be extensive, Torres said slowly, but if these animals really can communicate with Shadowhunters, we could establish the first formal peaceful contact between human colonists and indigenous predator species, Sarah finished. It would be a historic breakthrough in xenobiology. Dr. Williams was already pulling up safety procedures on her tablet. We could set up a controlled environment at the forest edge. Full remote monitoring, emergency extraction protocols, multiple backup safety measures. Whiskers looked up at Emma and meowed once, as if he understood what they were discussing and approved of the plan. Emma had learned to trust her cat's judgment about dangerous situations. I think he wants to try, she said. Whiskers has never backed away from anything that was important. Over the next several hours, the colony's best engineers and scientists worked together to create the most advanced interspecies communication facility ever attempted. They positioned sensors throughout the forest edge, established multiple emergency response protocols, and created a safe zone where Earth animals could interact with Shadowhunters while remaining under constant human protection. As the sun began to set over New Terra's purple sky, Whiskers walked calmly toward the forest edge where 6 massive alien predators waited in the shadows. Emma followed at a safe distance, surrounded by scientists and security personnel, all of them watching the most unusual diplomatic mission in human history. The old orange cat showed no fear as he approached the Shadowhunters. If anything, he seemed to grow more confident with each step, his tail held high and his green eyes focused on the massive creatures ahead of him. When Whiskers was about 10 feet from the nearest Shadowhunter, he sat down and began to make his special sound again. The alien creatures immediately responded with low, rumbling vocalizations of their own. Through the monitoring equipment, the scientists could track the complex exchange of sonic information flowing between cat and predators. "They're negotiating," Williams said in amazement, watching the real-time analysis of the sound patterns. "Whiskers is establishing territorial boundaries, and the Shadowhunters are acknowledging his authority." The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Whiskers occasionally standing to gesture with his tail or changing his position to emphasize particular points. The Shadowhunters responded with subtle shifts in posture and careful modulations of their vocalizations. Finally, Whiskers stood up and walked directly to the largest Shadowhunter. The massive creature lowered its head until it was nearly touching the ground, bringing its 6 glowing eyes level with the small cat. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, predator and pet regarded each other with what looked like mutual respect. Then Whiskers reached out with one paw and gently touched the Shadowhunter's nose. The alien creature made a soft sound that the monitoring equipment translated as something like agreement or peaceful understanding. The cat turned and walked back toward the human observers, his diplomatic mission apparently complete. Behind him, the Shadowhunters melted back into the forest, but their departure felt different from previous encounters. They weren't retreating in confusion or fear. They were returning to their territory as equals who had reached an understanding with their new neighbors. Emma ran to meet Whiskers, scooping him up as he purred with satisfaction. "You did it. You made friends with them." Dr. Sarah Chun watched her daughter and her cat with a mixture of scientific fascination and maternal pride. In the space of 3 days, their understanding of Earth animals, alien intelligence, and the possibilities for interspecies cooperation had been completely revolutionized. "Commander Torres," she said, "I believe we're going to need to revise our colonial defense strategies. It appears we brought our own diplomatic corps with us from Earth, and we never knew it." Torres nodded, still looking stunned by what he had witnessed. "Dr. Chun, I think we're going to need to revise a lot more than that. If Earth animals can establish peaceful relations with apex predators, what other capabilities have we been overlooking?" As the new Terra colony settled into evening, the scientists began the enormous task of documenting what they had learned. Somewhere in the forest, Shadowhunters were probably having their own discussions about the strange new creatures who had arrived from the stars, bringing with them small, fierce allies who spoke the language of respect and territory. Emma sat with Whiskers in her lap, looking up at the unfamiliar constellations that sparkled in New Terra's night sky. She was beginning to understand that Earth animals weren't just pets or companions. They were partners in humanity's greatest adventure, carrying within their genes the wisdom of survival that would help both species explore the galaxy together. The universe, it turned out, was much more cooperative than anyone had ever imagined. It just took the right translators to make the introductions. 2 weeks after first contact between Whiskers and the Shadowhunter pack, New Terra Colony had become the center of the most extraordinary xenobiological research project in human history. Scientists from across the galaxy were requesting permission to study what the media had dubbed the Earth animal phenomenon, and the colonial administration was struggling to manage the sudden influx of attention. Emma Chun had adapted to her new life as the owner of the galaxy's most famous cat with the resilience that only children possess. She still attended her regular classes, still played with her friends, and still helped her mother with research tasks. But now these ordinary activities took place in the shadow of something much larger, the growing partnership between Earth animals and the indigenous species of New Terra. The colony's main conference room was packed with representatives from a dozen different worlds, all eager to understand how domestic pets had accomplished what military forces and diplomatic corps had failed to achieve for centuries. At the center of the discussion sat Whiskers, who had become remarkably comfortable with his role as an interspecies ambassador. The implications extend far beyond this single colony, Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Kepler Research Institute was saying. If Earth animals can establish communication protocols with Shadowhunters, they might be able to bridge gaps between humans and other non-human intelligences throughout the galaxy. Commander Torres nodded from his position at the head of the table. We've already received requests from 17 different colonial governments asking about Earth animal deployment for their own predator management issues. Emma listened to the adult conversation while absently scratching Whiskers behind the ears. Her cat purred contentedly, seemingly unaware that he was being discussed as a potential solution to some of the galaxy's most challenging problems. Dr. Sarachun presented the latest research findings to the assembled group. Our analysis shows that Earth animals possess what we're calling evolutionary adaptability. They can modify their communication and behavioral strategies when encountering new species, drawing on genetic programming that developed over millions of years of interaction with diverse Earth ecosystems. But how does that explain their effectiveness against creatures they've never encountered before? Asked Dr. Voss from the Mars Biological Survey. Shadowhunters evolve on a completely different world under completely different conditions. That's where it gets interesting, Dr. Williams replied, activating a holographic display that showed comparative brain scans. Earth animals don't approach new species as completely unknown quantities. They analyze behavioral patterns, body language, and vocal communications to identify universal elements of aggression, fear, and territorial behavior. The hologram shifted to show Whisker's brain activity during his first encounter with the Shadowhunter. Specific regions lit up in complex patterns as the cat processed information about the alien predator. Whiskers was essentially running millions of years of evolutionary programming to understand what he was facing, Williams continued. Earth's diverse ecosystem required animals to develop flexible response systems. When they encounter new predators, they can rapidly adapt their strategies based on universal principles of animal behavior. Dr. Tanaka leaned forward, studying the brain scan data. So Earth animals are essentially universal translators for interspecies behavioral communication? More than that, Sarah corrected. They're active negotiators. They don't just understand what other species are communicating, they can formulate appropriate responses and establish ongoing relationships. Emma raised her hand tentatively. The room full of distinguished scientists and officials turned to look at the 8-year-old girl who had started it all. Yes, Emma, her mother encouraged. I was just wondering, Emma said carefully, if maybe we're thinking about this backwards. Everyone keeps talking about what Earth animals can do for us, but what if they're not doing it for us at all? The room fell silent. Commander Torres raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Well, Emma continued, gaining confidence. Whiskers didn't save me because I'm human. He saved me because I'm his family. And when he talked to the Shadowhunters, maybe he wasn't representing all humans. Maybe he was just making sure his territory was safe. Dr. Voss blinked in surprise. You're suggesting that Earth animals view humans as part of their pack or family structure? I think, Emma said, looking down at Whiskers, that Earth animals adopted us a long time ago. We think we domesticated them, but maybe they domesticated us. They decided to take care of us, and now they're still doing it, even out here among the stars. The implications of Emma's observation rippled through the room. If Earth animals saw humans as family members rather than masters, it would fundamentally change how they approached interspecies relationships. They weren't serving human interests. They were protecting their extended family. Dr. Williams began pulling up new data sets on her tablet. Emma, I think you might have identified something crucial. Earth animals consistently show protective behaviors that extend beyond simple obedience or training. They make independent decisions about threat assessment and response strategies, which means, Dr. Tanaka added thoughtfully, that they're not tools we can deploy for diplomatic purposes. They're autonomous partners who choose to cooperate with us. Commander Torres was beginning to understand the political implications. And if other species recognize that Earth animals are acting independently, rather than following human commands, it changes the entire dynamic of interspecies negotiation. Sarah Chun felt a surge of pride in her daughter's insight. Emma, you've just identified why the Shadowhunters respond to Earth animals differently than they respond to humans. They recognize that cats and dogs are making their own decisions about territorial agreements. The conference room's communication system activated with an incoming priority transmission. The main screen displayed Dr. Martinez calling from the forest monitoring station, his face flushed with excitement. Sarah, you need to see this immediately. The Shadowhunter pack has brought their young to the colony border. The display switched to live footage from the forest edge. 6 adult Shadowhunters sat in their usual semicircle, but now they were accompanied by 3 juveniles, smaller versions of the massive predators, with brighter scales and more curious expressions. They're introducing their offspring to the territory, Williams breathed. This is formal recognition of a permanent, peaceful boundary. Emma stood up, still holding Whiskers. They want their children to know about us. Through the monitoring cameras, they watched as one of the juvenile Shadowhunters cautiously approached the agreed-upon boundary line. The young creature was clearly curious about the human settlement, its 6 eyes focused intently on the buildings and activity in the distance. Suddenly, a familiar orange shape appeared at the forest edge. Whiskers had somehow left the conference room and made his way to the monitoring station. Emma's heart skipped as she watched her cat approach the juvenile Shadowhunter with the same calm confidence he had shown during the first diplomatic contact. How did he get out there? Torres demanded. Earth animals have been developing independent patrol patterns, Williams explained, checking her research notes. Whiskers apparently considers ongoing communication with the Shadowhunters part of his territorial responsibilities. On screen, they watched as Whiskers and the young Shadowhunter began what could only be described as a conversation. The cat made his special diplomatic sounds while the juvenile responded with soft, questioning vocalizations. The adult Shadowhunters observed the interaction with what seemed like approval. He's teaching it, Emma realized. Whiskers is teaching the young one how to talk to humans. Dr. Tanaka was frantically taking notes. This suggests that Earth animals are establishing their own ongoing diplomatic protocols, independent of human oversight. After several minutes of communication, Whiskers gently approached the juvenile Shadowhunter and touched its nose with his paw, just as he had done with the adults during the first contact. The young creature made a sound that the monitoring equipment translated as pleased understanding. Then, something extraordinary happened. The juvenile Shadowhunter carefully extended one massive claw and gently touched Whiskers' orange fur. For a moment, alien predator and Earth cat stood connected in what could only be described as friendship. The adult Shadowhunters made soft rumbling sounds that seemed to indicate satisfaction. Their diplomatic mission was complete. Their offspring now understood the territorial agreements and communication protocols that govern the relationship between their species and the new arrivals from Earth. Whiskers returned to the colony border and disappeared from the camera view, presumably heading back to the conference room where his human companions were waiting. The Shadowhunter family melted back into the forest, their peaceful intentions confirmed once again. Emma was already running toward the door when Whiskers appeared in the conference room a few minutes later. She scooped him up, relieved that his latest diplomatic mission had concluded safely. "You're teaching them about friendship," she said to her cat. "That's what you're really doing, isn't it?" Dr. Sarah Chun looked at her daughter and her cat with new understanding. Emma was right. This wasn't about human expansion into alien territory. It was about Earth animals extending their concept of family and pack behavior to include both humans and the indigenous species they encountered. "Commander Torres," she said, "I think we need to fundamentally revise our approach to colonial expansion." "How so?" "We've been thinking about colonization as human settlements in alien environments. But what we're really doing is creating extended communities that include Earth animals as active participants in interspecies relationships. Dr. Voss looked up from his note-taking. You're suggesting that Earth animals should be considered equal partners in colonial planning? I'm suggesting that they already are equal partners, Sarah replied. We just didn't realize it until now. The implications were staggering. If Earth animals were actively establishing their own diplomatic relationships with alien species, then human colonies were actually multi-species communities from the beginning. Earth animals weren't just pets or tools. They were fellow explorers, each bringing their own evolutionary wisdom to the challenge of surviving and thriving on distant worlds. Over the following hours, the assembled scientists and officials worked to develop new protocols for colonial expansion that recognized Earth animals as independent agents rather than human property. The legal frameworks alone would require complete revision, not to mention the philosophical implications of acknowledging that humans had never truly domesticated other Earth species. They had simply been accepted into their extended family structures. Emma sat quietly with Whiskers, listening to the adults discuss the future of interspecies cooperation throughout the galaxy. Her cat purred contentedly, occasionally opening his green eyes to watch the proceedings with what seemed like satisfaction. Outside, New Terra's purple sky was transitioning toward evening, and somewhere in the forest, young shadow hunters were learning about the strange creatures from Earth who spoke the language of friendship and respect. The galaxy was becoming a smaller, more connected place, one interspecies conversation at a time. As the conference broke up and the various officials and scientists departed to their ships and research stations, Emma remained with Whiskers in the quiet conference room. She thought about all the Earth animals throughout human-controlled space who might be having their own diplomatic encounters with alien species, establishing relationships and territorial agreements that their human companions knew nothing about. You've been taking care of us all along, she said to Whiskers, even when we thought we were taking care of you. The old orange cat looked up at her with those wise green eyes and meowed once, as if confirming what she had always suspected, that the partnership between humans and Earth animals was far deeper and more complex than anyone had ever imagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and discoveries as the colony continued to develop its unique multi-species community. But tonight, as the stars of an alien sky shone down on New Terra, Emma-chan and her diplomatic cat sat together in the comfortable silence of family, surrounded by the infinite possibilities of a universe where friendship could bridge any gap between worlds. 1 year after the first Shadowhunter encounter, New Terra Colony had become something unprecedented in human history, a truly integrated multi-species community. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but through thousands of small interactions, negotiations, and agreements facilitated by Earth animals who seemed to understand the nuances of interspecies diplomacy better than any human diplomat. Emma-chan, now 9 years old, walked along the forest path that had once been considered too dangerous for children. Beside her trotted Whiskers, his orange fur now showing more white streaks, but his steps still confident and alert. The path was no longer just a colonial access route. It had become a recognized boundary where 3 different species met on equal terms. As they approached the traditional meeting area at the forest edge, Emma could see the familiar sight of shadow hunters waiting in the shadows. Over the past year, these meetings had evolved from tense diplomatic encounters into something resembling neighborhood visits. The massive alien predators had learned to recognize individual humans, and many had developed preferences for particular Earth animals they enjoyed communicating with. Today's gathering included several human families, their various Earth pets, and a group of 6 adult Shadowhunters accompanied by the 3 juveniles who had grown considerably over the past year. What made today special was the presence of Dr. Elena Vasquez, the new director of the Galactic Interspecies Communication Institute, who had come to witness what the galaxy had started calling the New Terra model. Dr. Chun, Director Vasquez, said, approaching Emma's mother, "The reports we've received simply don't do justice to what you've accomplished here. This level of peaceful integration between humans, Earth animals, and indigenous predator species was thought to be theoretically impossible. Dr. Sarah Chan watched as Whiskers approached the largest shadow hunter and began their familiar greeting ritual, a complex exchange of sounds and gestures that had evolved over months of regular interaction. Director, I think the key insight is that we didn't accomplish this. The Earth animals did. We just learned to follow their lead. Emma listened to the adult conversation while keeping one eye on Whiskers and his shadow hunter friend. The massive alien creature had developed what could only be described as affection for her cat, always lowering its great head to receive the gentle touch of Whiskers' paw. In return, the shadow hunter would make soft rumbling sounds that Whiskers seemed to find deeply satisfying. Emma, Director Vasquez said, "Your mother tells me you've been keeping detailed observations of these interactions. Would you mind sharing some of your insights?" Over the past year, Emma had indeed been documenting everything she observed about the relationships between Earth animals and shadow hunters. What had started as simple notes about Whiskers' behavior had evolved into a comprehensive study of interspecies friendship that was now being referenced by researchers throughout the galaxy. The most important thing, Emma said, is that they're not just being polite to each other. They actually like spending time together. Whiskers gets excited when he knows we're coming to visit the shadow hunters, and I've seen them waiting for him when we're late. Dr. Williams, who had continued her behavioral research throughout the year, nodded in agreement. Emma has identified something crucial. These aren't just diplomatic relationships maintained for practical purposes. Genuine emotional bonds have formed between species that evolved on different worlds. To demonstrate this point, one of the juvenile shadow hunters approached the group of humans and made a series of questioning sounds. Emma recognized the pattern. The young alien was asking for Max, the beagle who had become its favorite Earth animal companion. Max couldn't come today, Emma explained to the juvenile, using the simplified sound patterns that humans had learned to produce. He's at the veterinarian getting his health checkup. The young shadow hunter's response was unmistakable disappointment. Its scales shifted to a duller color, and it made soft, sad sounds that needed no translation. Director Vasquez stared in amazement as the alien creature displayed obvious emotional attachment to an Earth dog. "Remarkable," she breathed. "The juvenile is experiencing genuine friendship emotions toward a different species." "They all are," Emma confirmed. "The shadow hunters remember individual Earth animals. They have preferences, and they get upset when their friends are absent. Some of them even play together now." As if summoned by Emma's words, two of the juvenile shadow hunters and a golden retriever named Buddy began an elaborate game that had evolved over months of interaction. The massive alien creatures would hide behind trees while Buddy pretended to search for them. Then they would leap out with playful roars that the dog answered with excited barking. Dr. Vasquez watched this display with the expression of someone whose understanding of the universe was being fundamentally altered. "Dr. Chun, what are the implications of this development for human expansion throughout the galaxy?" "Director," Sarah replied, "we're beginning to understand that Earth animals may be humanity's greatest asset for peaceful colonization. They possess natural abilities to establish emotional connections with non-human intelligences that we're only beginning to appreciate. More than that, Dr. Williams added, consulting her latest research data, Earth animals are actively teaching both humans and alien species new forms of social interaction. They're creating hybrid cultures that combine elements from multiple worlds." Emma watched as Whiskers demonstrated this principle in real time. Her cat was showing one of the adult shadow hunters a new sound pattern he had developed, a combination of traditional cat vocalizations and shadow hunter communication frequencies. The alien creature listened carefully, then attempted to reproduce the hybrid sound, creating something that belonged to neither species but could be understood by both. "You see," Emma said to Director Vasquez, "they're not just translating between us and the shadow hunters. They're creating a new language that everyone can use." The implications were staggering. If Earth animals could facilitate the development of interspecies communication methods, they might be able to bridge gaps between humans and any intelligent alien species they encountered. The galaxy could become a vast network of cooperative communities rather than a collection of isolated worlds struggling to understand each other. Director Vasquez activated a recording device and began documenting everything she observed. Dr. Chun, the Institute needs to understand how this model can be replicated on other worlds. How many Earth animals would be required to establish similar relationships with different alien species? That's the beautiful part, Sarah replied. We don't think it requires large numbers. Earth animals seem to be naturally inclined toward this type of interspecies diplomacy. A few cats and dogs might be sufficient to establish peaceful contact with most non-human intelligences. Though each species brings different strengths, Dr. Williams noted, cats excel at establishing territorial agreements and respect-based relationships. Dogs are outstanding at creating play-based social bonds. Birds seem particularly good at long-distance communication with flying species. Emma listened to the scientists discuss the technical aspects while continuing to observe the ongoing interactions between her neighbors. Because that's what the Shadowhunters had become, neighbors. They weren't threats or alien others anymore, but individuals with personalities, preferences, and friendships. As the afternoon progressed, more families arrived for the weekly interspecies social gathering that had evolved naturally over the months. Children played under the watchful eyes of both human parents and Shadowhunter adults who had learned to recognize and protect all the young creatures in their shared territory. Emma noticed something that the adults had missed in their scientific analysis. The human children who had grown up with regular Shadowhunter contact were different from their parents. They showed no fear of the massive alien creatures, communicated with them naturally, and seemed to understand their emotional states intuitively. Director Vasquez, Emma, said, I think the next generation is going to be even better at this than the Earth animals. How do you mean? The kids who grow up here don't see Shadowhunters as aliens. They just see them as big friends who look different. When these children grow up and travel to other worlds, they'll probably be able to make friends with any species they meet. Dr. Vasquez considered this observation with growing excitement. You're suggesting that interspecies social integration might be a learned skill that human children can develop naturally in multi-species environments. I'm saying, Emma corrected, that making friends is making friends, no matter what your friends look like or where they come from. Earth animals taught us that, and now we're teaching it to our kids. As the social gathering continued into the evening, Director Vasquez compiled her observations into what would become the foundational document for the galaxy's new approach to colonial expansion. The new Terra model would be implemented on dozens of worlds over the following decades, with Earth animals serving as interspecies ambassadors and human children growing up as natural galactic citizens. But for Emma, the most important part of the day was the quiet moment when she sat with Whiskers under New Terra's purple sky, watching Shadowhunter families and human families sharing the same space in peaceful cooperation. Her cat purred contentedly in her lap, occasionally opening his green eyes to check on their various friends scattered around the forest clearing. You started something pretty amazing, Emma whispered to Whiskers. The whole galaxy is going to be different because of what you did. Whiskers meowed softly and rubbed his head against her hand. Emma understood that, from his perspective, he had simply done what any reasonable cat would do, protected his family, and made friends with the neighbors. The fact that this had revolutionized interspecies relations throughout human space was just a pleasant side effect. As the first stars appeared in the alien sky, the various families began their evening departure routines. Human children hugged their Shadowhunter friends goodbye. Earth animals exchanged final communications with their alien companions, and promises were made for tomorrow's play sessions and next week's gathering. Director Vasquez prepared to return to her ship with data that would reshape how humanity approached its expansion into the galaxy. But Emma and Whiskers simply walked home along the familiar path, past the research station where it all began, to their small house where dinner was waiting. The universe had become a friendlier place, one interspecies friendship at a time. And at the center of it all was the simple truth that Earth animals had always known, but humans had forgotten. that making friends was one of the most important skills any species could possess, and that friendship could bridge any gap between worlds, cultures, or even evolutionary histories. As Emma tucked Whiskers into his favorite sleeping spot and prepared for her own bedtime, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning when Shadowhunter had emerged from the forest. Back then, she had been just a little girl with a pet cat living on a distant world. Now, she was a citizen of a galaxy-wide community where differences between species were celebrated rather than feared. Outside her window, the sounds of New Terra's night were different than they had been a year ago. Along with the familiar calls of indigenous creatures, she could hear the soft vocalizations of Shadowhunters settling in for the evening. Their sounds now as comforting and normal as any other part of home. Whiskers purred one final time before falling asleep, his orange fur rising and falling with peaceful breathing. Tomorrow would bring new adventures and discoveries as the colony continued to evolve.